Hola a todos y bienvenido a la semana del Gran Premio de Mexico. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to race week once again. The US Grand Prix is over and we have a very quick turnaround with the Mexico Grand Prix right around the corner this weekend. I hope you're excited. I know I am, and this is the video where we're going to be going over our predictions for what we think is going to happen this weekend in Mexico City. What's going on, guys? I'm Dakota and we're here to make our predictions for this weekend's Grand Prix. We're going to be making predictions for our biggest positive surprise, our biggest disappointment, our qualifying top three, our race podium, and then of course we will round things out with our one crazy prediction. If you're interested in joining in on our predictions, as this video goes on, you'll see my community predictions appear along the bottom of the screen. And if you're interested in having your predictions included in the video, you can head to the link down below, join the Discord, and join in every week as we lead up to a Grand Prix. I'll make a call out for these exact same predictions. And if you get them in before basically this video gets uploaded the Wednesday before the weekend starts, your predictions will be included along the bottom of the video, as you'll see in this one. But also, before we get started, if you haven't already, subscribe down below, leave a comment what your predictions are going to be for this weekend. And last but not least, if you enjoy the video at any moment, please leave a like rating. It really helps me out. But let's go ahead, let's jump on into this thing and get started with our biggest positive surprise. All right, we're going first off with our biggest positive surprise, and I think I am absolutely cooking this week, or it's going to be the worst week I might have had this entire season. I'm really trying to get really granular with this one, and I'm really trying to get out of left field instead of picking the same drivers every single week. Now, let's kick things off with our biggest positive surprise, and we're going to a source in a moment that I don't think many people are going to be interested in thinking about going into this weekend. And I am going for Esteban Ocon as my biggest positive surprise this week. Now, I know what you're thinking. Didn't he just finish at the back at the US Grand Prix? And I'm going to say yes, he did. But he was also spun in the Grand Prix, which basically effectively ended his race where it started. There is also the small wrinkle in that while Alpine did bring upgrades to the US Grand Prix, only Pierre Gasly had the upgrades. And we saw what he was able to do in qualifying and what could have potentially done in the Grand Prix had he not had a 7-second pit stop and really put him behind the 8 ball deep into the midfield and just got tangled up in a bunch of battles down the stretch. That said, over a single lap and in the beginning of the Grand Prix, they were absolutely cooking. And so I think Esteban Ocon is due for a bounce back weekend coming off of a rather disappointing week at in the United States in Austin, Texas. Shout out, I was there. It was awesome. And so I think we actually could see a bit of a cooking style weekend for Esteban, who finished in the points in this race last year when he finished in P10. And I think we could see a good bounce back weekend from Esteban, and I think we'll see it. What do you guys think? Let me know down in the comment section below. Okay, let's move on to biggest disappointment. And this one I think is going to be a bit of an oddball pick in terms of the grand scheme of things. But I just have a feeling going into this weekend, specifically also keeping in mind what we saw last weekend in Austin, Texas. I am going for Lando Norris is my biggest disappointment. And in the grand scheme of things, it's going to take multiple factors to get here, but I think it could happen, and I'm going to take the time to explain a little bit now and then a little bit at the end, because this is going to tie into my one crazy prediction. I think Lando is starting to get to a point where if he truly wants to really challenge for the world title, he needs to perform. He needs to realistically be beating Max pretty handedly and by multiple positions, and hoping that other people can also take points off of him. And so I think this is going to start adding some extra pressure on top of Lando, and I think it could be the moment with only 5 races left at this point, including Mexico, that he's gonna have to start making moves. And I think that just really sets up for an ultimate letdown style moment where maybe the pressure just gets a bit too much and it just boils over and something bad were to happen. So I think it's going to be one of those interesting weekends where we're really going to see what stuff Lando is realistically made of, because and being in a title fight like this where it's about as long a shot as you can get and you're almost trusting and needing something else from the other driver, in this case Max Verstappen, to go wrong, you really need to put yourself in the best position possible every single session, every single time out. And this is really, I think, going to see the moment that it starts to ramp up, and we'll see what Lando's made of. What do you think? All right, let's move on to qualifying predictions, and we're gonna start off in P3, and I am going for Lando Norris this week in P3. Now, I know what you're saying. Didn't he just take pole position in Austin? Yes, he did. But if we all forgetting that last lap that Max Verstappen was on before George Russell lost it at turn 19 and went into the wall, effectively ending qualifying where right then and there, Max was absolutely flying and was on pace to beat Lando's time by multiple tenths of a second. I think we could see an instance in which, in terms of qualifying pace, the McLaren just might not be set up for that. Now, I know Mexico is kind of its own little bubble in terms of, comparisons to other tracks, but I think this is setting up to be a very interesting qualifying session. And if McLaren just doesn't get on it correctly like they did in Austin, I think it could be a long weekend for them. And I think Lando and the McLaren are good enough to put it in the top three. But it's just one of those weird feelings right now, especially with some of the momentum that other teams have, that we could see Lando start in the top three and obviously be there for the fights, but maybe not quick enough to put it on pole. As we move on to P2, we're going with another familiar name, Max Verstappen. That's right, I am going with Lando's title rival, I guess at this point, as Max, I think, is just finding his form again in a Red Bull that technically, I think, took a step back from where the RB20 was before this, but at the same time was also slightly step forward, where they tried to reverse course of a lot of the failed upgrades over the last, few months. And so I think we're starting to see Max kind of get settled back in the Red Bull, and we're going to be very interested to see what he does in Mexico this weekend. But I have to imagine that with the qualifying pace coming back and the race pace at the same time, I think this could be another instance of Max just getting the most out of the car, and maybe even then some, especially at a track like Mexico, which he's performed fairly decently at over the last couple of years. And so I think it could be another one of those weekends where Max is just kind of on it from the jump, and Red Bull with another weekend to start gathering data, especially with all 3 practice sessions they're going to get. And also the extra 30 minutes because of the Pirelli tire test. This is going to be a key moment for Red Bull to dial in the setup, and I think we could see them take another step forward. And this time, it's to the tune of P2 in qualifying. And that leaves only last but certainly not least, my pole position pick is Charles Leclerc. Ferrari were absolutely cooking in race pace last week, and I think we could see them trying to balance it out with a little bit more qualifying pace here in Mexico City, with obviously the very unique atmospheric, we'll go with atmospheric scenarios and situations that are around in Mexico City. I think this could be an instance of where Charles just kind of all of a sudden just comes out, puts in one banging lap in Q3, and puts it on pole position. Because as we know, he's very, very good at getting the absolute maximum and then some in qualifying. And I think this could be another one of those instances where Max and Lando are a little too worried about themselves, and Charles just steamrolls through right at the end to put it on pole position. So there we have it, a Charles Leclerc pole, a Max Verstappen P2, and a Lando Norris P3. Am I too crazy? Let me know down in the comment section below. Alright, race Sunday, the final results when all of the dust settles, our race podium predictions, and once again we are going to kick things off in P3, and you're going to notice something that is going to lead into our final prediction here in a moment. But that said, my race podium this weekend is going to kick us off in P3 with Sergio Perez. I think Sergio is going to end up back on the podium once again. I think he's going to want to avenge whatever happened last year at this race, where he went absolutely insane in turn 1. I think he's going to bounce back. I think this is going to be set up for a bounce back, feel good story moment, especially with all the drama and narratives kind of surrounding his Red Bull seat right now. I think this could be an instance of seeing Checo kind of come into his home race and actually performing. I know it's kind of all over the place to really, predict these kinds of things or expect these kinds of things from Checo, but I think this is just the vibes in the air, and it's setting itself up so perfectly, especially because it's going to kind of go perfectly with my next predictions, and so stay tuned for my rest of my thoughts. I'm going to cover a lot of this in the next one, I promise, but we're going to quickly move on to my pick for P2, and for that I have gone for Oscar Piastri. I think we're going to see Oscar Piastri on the podium once again. Not necessarily a disappointing result in the US Grand Prix, but at the same time, he finished behind Lando. And just wasn't necessarily on the same race pace that the others were. And I think that probably had something to do with the setup and kind of sort of the lack of understanding around the upgrades that McLaren brought. And so I think it's going to be a good instance of kind of similarly to how I mentioned with Esteban Ocon, kind of getting up to speed with the upgrades and kind of being able to move forward and understand them, as well as what I mentioned with Red Bull. And so I think this is going to be another instance of Oscar kind of coming in after a few races that are sort of flying under the radar, and I think we're going to see a fantastic result from Oscar this weekend. Probably, hopefully, to the result of a P2, because I will take the points because I'm teetering a fine razor's edge at this point. But of course, that leaves our one and only winner of the Mexico Grand Prix. I stayed with a tried and true, a recently demonstrated true performer. Charles Leclerc will win the Mexico Grand Prix this weekend. That's right, I think Charles is going to start on pole, finish with a win, and it's going to be very, very exciting. I think it's going to be a very, very fun one if this were to happen. And I think Charles and Ferrari really showcased the race pace that they're capable of putting out at Circuit of the Americas last weekend. And they can replicate that again in the sort of tricky conditions of Mexico and the elevation and the altitude they're going to have to deal with. But they've run very well here in the past, and I think this could be a very good instance of another solid weekend for Ferrari, especially as they try and continue to push for P2 in the Constructors' title. And I think, if my memory serves, depending on where Carlos would finish in this prediction, they could potentially even overtake Red Bull, depending on everything that happens. And so it's going to be a very interesting one. I think Charles and Ferrari have what it takes to do this. It's more of just, will they actually do it? Or will they overthink it and outdo themselves, 60 chessing their way into an okay response, but at the same time, a little disappointing, especially after what they did in the US Grand Prix. What do you think? Let me know down in the comment section below. Alright, I've teased it long enough. Let's finish this thing out with our one crazy prediction. And my one crazy prediction is that we're going to see contact between Max and Lando that is going to severely alter their results in this race, a la Austria of this year, where they eventually came together in turn 3 in Austria. Ultimately, Lando ended up not finishing the race, and Max, who had garnered a 10-second penalty from his contact with Lando, I believe still finished in the points, thanks to a big enough gap. And it really was a boiling over points of that, at least that point in the season. And man, that's still the season. It feels like that race was forever ago at this point. But I think we could see a very similar thing happen here. In Austria, Lando was coming to terms with having the fastest car, and now Lando is having to come to terms with that he's going to have to do more if he seriously wants to contend for the World Drivers' Championship this season. Now, what I think that comes to is a little bit of extra aggression from Lando, which I think a lot of us have kind of been almost not necessarily begging him for, but really implying that he needs to start getting on it, because at this point, we saw it at the US Grand Prix where he tried to do the same thing on all of the corners, on all of the laps, before ultimately the incident that came about where he got his penalty and still finished behind Max. And I think it's going to be a good weekend where Lando's going to try and learn from that, get a little more aggressive with Max, and try and do something a little different. And I think that's where the trouble could stir. I think it's going to be a moment where Lando realizes he's going to have to do almost whatever it takes to finish ahead of Max. And Max, as we all know, is more than happy to go into a corner with the mentality of, if we crash, we crash. No skin off my back. And as the World Drivers' Championship leader at this point, that only helps him. And so this is going to be very, very interesting. And my one crazy prediction this weekend in Mexico is that Lando and Max take each other out, giving us a fun podium, a fun storyline as we head to the next race after that, and a very, very excited Twitter. What do you guys think of my predictions? Let me know down in the comment section below. Guys, there we go. My predictions for the 2024 Mexico City Grand Prix is in and done with. What do you guys think of my predictions? I hope you enjoyed it. I hope your predictions go well, and I'm really putting it all on the line here. Starting to fall behind in our little community predictions challenge, and so I'm really hoping that I chefed just enough here and not burn myself when it's all said and done. But guys, that is going to wrap it up for me here. The weekend is going to begin before we know it. If you haven't already, subscribe down below. And if you enjoyed the video and you made it this far, leave a like rating. It really helps me out. And make sure to turn on notifications so you don't miss a single upload. But that's going to wrap it up from here, guys. I appreciate you. I'll see you in the next one.